Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Paul Rook, and tonight, as always, we are joined by the stupendous Kerry Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello there.
Right, so you've remained to your stupendous.
Oh, we're doing well. We're doing really well on this stupendous pedestal that he's put us on.
Can we have that before our names or afterwards on our correspondence?
You can have it before if you want.
Awesome.
Right.
From now on, I shall be forever known as the stupendous Kerry Greenaway.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's an accolade.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
So what have you been up to this week?
Well, I've just written a blog. I've just done a blog finally, after being nagged relentlessly, on the importance of smell, which came off the back of the Holy Relic show we did a couple of weeks ago, the odour of sanctity. Really caught my imagination and actually ties quite nicely into what we're talking about today, but we'll wait a minute before we get into that. And I found that fascinating. Because even today on my news feed, people were putting, I can smell the smell of tobacco, Dad's here. Do you know what I mean? Kind of thing. And I think, that's so important, isn't it, in regards to the paranormal and the sense of smell is something we kind of overlook.
Yes.
We overlook it a lot.
Well, they say it's one of the most common forms of paranormal experience, don't they? And I did actually was fortunate enough to read your blog a bit earlier, but it is good. It is good, so that's something for the guys that are out there to look out for anyway when it's released.
Yeah.
I think by the time this show goes out, it probably would have been released because it was late.
Yeah, very late.
Yeah.
Sorry, everybody. Being very remiss on my writing skills at the moment. And I thought, what struck me when I was researching that, because we've headed down a bit of a religious rabbit hole, really, and a lot of that's tied in with belief system. And we've talked about belief system before, and I think it's really underestimated your own personal belief systems, how important they are and how they play into your experiences of life, how you react to things, how you assimilate issues that come to you. You know, all those things are all based on this underlying belief systems that you have. And you don't have got one, you've got loads and loads of different ones on different levels. And I think it's so incredibly important to know your belief systems when looking at paranormal phenomena as a whole. I think there's a lot to be said for examination of self in regards to your belief systems. It's incredibly important, and all your senses play into this. Everything is connected, isn't it? We keep going back to this all the time. Everything is so connected to how your brain works and how your body works and how that influences your experience of external influences, and it's just fascinating. The whole thing fascinates me. This is the bit I like about the paranormal.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a subject we do return to a lot doing these shows, and it's sort of something I've been following along, and it is very important, and as you say, and it's a very overlooked sort of aspect of people that are involved in the paranormal. They just sort of tend to accept it and not really sort of look into it any further than that. But sort of how you think and how you approach things certainly, I feel, does affect this phenomena.
I think it's very much a bit like the old theology question: if a tree falls over in the woods and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? And I think that's very true with the paranormal as well. If activity happens and there's no one there to witness it, does it actually happen? So it makes you wonder how much of it is actually created by ourselves.
The only thing we can be sure of when paranormal activity is reported and stuff is it's been observed, and so the only sort of factor we've got to go on is the human factor.
Yeah.
But again, this comes down to cause and effect, doesn't it? Because we only ever witness the effect. We don't understand the cause of that, and that's important too. That's where the fundamentals of it all, of the proof of if it happens.
Well, that's where the investigation part comes in, and I don't think there's many good investigation. I mean, yeah, okay, there are teams out there that go out and investigate it, but I think sometimes because of lack of experience and stuff, they sometimes miss some of the aspects and get a completely different outcome.
I think that's where science comes into it, though, as well. Because
Yeah.
the science is the understanding and the explanation of how things work. When you look at science stuff, and 99% of that is way above my remit, my head, my intelligence level, I suppose you call it. When I start reading some theses, and my mind literally implodes because I don't get it. But then, to be fair, when I was at school, there was a lot of things in maths and things like that they would do, and I'd be like, oh, I just don't get it,
Yeah.
So thank God we have got minds that can work in that way, that can work to help and explain. And that's actually where science and phenomena start to come closer together, when they start exploring those theories and looking for proof to back it up with in ways that we, no disrespect to anybody, but most of us couldn't even begin to start looking at. I do think on an investigation front, we should be looking at a lot more factors than we look at. Recording a lot more factors, because I actually think it's not down to one explanation. I think it's a combination. I've thought this for a long time. And what that combination is, I don't know. But I think it is a combination. So I would like to see teams, excuse me, recording a lot more different external environmental factors. But that takes kit, and kit is expensive. The type of kit that you would need to record those is expensive, and again, out of our remit, quite frankly.
Well, that's it. I mean, not only have you got to have the kit, but you've also got to have it scientifically calibrated. And again, that's something that not many teams... I mean, okay, there might be one or two out there, but I don't know many teams that calibrate their equipment. I mean, I think you'll struggle to find teams that actually have their equipment pat tested as well.
I think some teams wouldn't even know what they're recording on their kit, and I don't mean that disrespectfully either. You know what I mean?
No.
Like you take a basic EMF field reader. Yeah, it's recording an EMF, but what part of the EMF is that recording? How big a scale is that recording?
Absolutely.
It's all that sort of thing.
This brings me back to the issue that I've got with people taking temperatures for when, like obviously the COVID thing. It's all well and good, random people taking temperatures, but without a little bit of medical knowledge in how to use that reading and understand that reading, and without a little bit of medical knowledge, it makes it a bit null and void, really.
And so many things can affect your temperature, not just COVID. There's so many.
That's the point of having the medical training.
Exactly. Anyway, let's go back to what we were talking about today. It's a bit of fascinating topic, and knowledge is power, right? And knowledge is power. I will go this every single step of the way.
And it does come into the medical field as well, this one.
It certainly does, because after the back of the Holy Relic show, we talked about incorruptible bodies in regards to saints, which led us down another little rabbit hole. And we looked at stigmata, which we didn't talk about last week, but we're going to talk about this week, because if you want to look at how a belief system can truly affect you on a physical front, then I think this is probably the best example we could come up with.
Yes, definitely.
In our opinion.
I was actually surprised. I mean, when people say stigmata to me, I just envisage the whole injury to the hand. Obviously, all the bits associated with Jesus on the cross. So, I don't know, a rash across the top of the head, maybe some round blisters or something in the middle of the hands. And that's about it. But apparently there's 321 general accepted stigmatas.
Yeah, that's people who have had the...
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's people who have had the signs of the crucifixion on the body, which is basically what stigmata is. Religious belief system in the fact that you have, like you say, the signs of Jesus' wounds on the cross.
Right, okay.
Okay, 62 have been sainted of those 321.
Yeah.
Well, I found this bit fascinating, though, when we was looking at this. It was 1,200 years after Jesus had died that the first stigmata was recorded, which was St. Francis of Assisi.
Yeah, that's sort of yeah. I found that interesting. It seems that it certainly was this. Could this be in conjunction when sort of the holy sort of religious philosophy was really sort of taking off? Because we are sort of looking back to the 13th century here, aren't we? So, and this is the time when the learned people were starting to sort of write down their thoughts about it and stuff. I mean, stuff had been written before, but I think sort of like from about 1,000 years ago onwards, this was sort of when the church really started to take off and the Christian faith was really becoming established as a worldwide religion.
That's an interesting point, though, isn't it? Is that if it's at that point where total belief in that story comes forward, takes a hold of the psyche, yeah? If that's sort of at the point, the melting pot point of where this becomes such a belief system, shall we say?
Yeah, and it's overtaken the medical field as well. I mean, okay, I know back then they didn't have much of a medical field, but people would experience that and they would go to the religious explanation as opposed to a medical one.
I also think maybe the trauma, because crucifixion is nothing new. Hundreds and thousands of people were crucified. That's nothing new. Jesus becomes a focus for that because of who he is. But there is trauma associated with that. It's brutal. We'll go into that later in the show. It's absolutely brutal. Human beings are brutal things. We're a brutal race. You can't get away from that. I know we're very socialised now, aren't we? Very cultural and very socialised. But that brutality lies within all of us. That's part of our shadow.
Yes, it's only just under the surface, and it can rise from, and even today, we see it in the world, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And it creates trauma, doesn't it? It creates a psyche trauma. And I would like to even go as far as saying a subconscious trauma on a grand scale, if you like, a collective unconscious, or CU, collective unconscious. I'm not remembering my training there. Trauma.
Yeah.
So when you have a focus of I'm working through this idea in my head, everybody, by the way. If you've got this focus of like a person that's gone through that trauma, it becomes a focus of that trauma. And if you've got that much belief in that hope, that the resurrection, the life after life scenario that Jesus represents, and it's the ultimate sacrifice, isn't it?
Well, yes.
If you've got that much of a belief system in it, and all of a sudden, we've got this beacon of hope in regards to this religious body stepping forward in the mainstream back in the 13th century, then it kind of doesn't surprise me that, this phenomena starts to appear. But it would only appear in the most zealous, would you say? The most...
zealous, devout. Yeah, it certainly seems to display itself that way. I mean, and again, and going back to something briefly I mentioned earlier, this sort of like the first case was in the 13th century, and the cultural time, and particularly in Europe, this was the start of the building of the cathedrals, the big sort of iconic and cathedrals, and plus the iconography in churches was becoming more pronounced. People would have seen crucifixes, would have seen images. These would have been coming into everyday life. People were first starting to actually see the representations, which before they only ever really read about, and the people that read about them were very few, because the literal rate, I should imagine, back then was very low. or the literacy rate.
But you say that when and this is completely unrelated to the topic we're talking about. When we was at that talk, and they were saying about the literary rate, it was astonishing. A lot more people were a lot more literate than you thought they were. The witches thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And that was going back to that sort of time range.
Yeah, true.
So it just became more mainstream, I would say. It became more, and like you say, the iconography. You know, you were seeing pictures of it more. And how often do we say people learn by imagery? Seeing something sticks in your mind more than somebody just saying something to you. So
that's why they had stories in stained glass windows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very visual time, I should imagine. But this was the time when it all started to come to the fore, the stained glass windows, you say, and the statues and stuff. And before this sort of time period, it would have been pretty much, you know, I should imagine churches would have been quite bare places and sort of places of worship. But then there was this huge explosion of the iconography to get the message out and spread it further.
Definitely. Then what do you then make then of? There are only 41 examples of males experiencing stigmata. That's quite a low percentage in regards to 321 generally accepted stigmata.
Yes, it is. And the only thing I can really think of, for quite a long time, and particularly during this period, the church was very male dominated. There wasn't really a place for women in the church. And I suppose for women to get noticed, some of the devout women were sort of psychologically perhaps actually producing this more so. Oh, no, hang on, I've got that wrong. You're talking about men, are you?
There's only 41 examples of males experiencing stigmata out of the 321.
Yeah, so it certainly seems to be that this was afflicting women more. And this could be a psychological sort of expression of women trying to sort of wanting to sort of prove their devoutness and saying that they are important as well.
I disagree with that.
In the church. Okay.
I actually disagree with that point. I think it's down to emotional connection. I think women are a lot more emotionally connected. And this is not being derogatory towards men at all. I'm not saying men aren't as devout, but they're more sensible, more level-headed about it. Women get very emotionally connected in a different way to how men. We've talked about a couple of weeks ago again about how different men and women think.
Yeah.
I actually think it's more to do with that than it is actually to do with a power struggle between men and women in regards to the religious fervour. You know, that's how I would read that. That's what I would take from that.
Fair enough,
but,
yeah.
You know, it could be a mixture of both. I don't know. You know, it's just an opinion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Paul, what do you make of the differences?
I don't really know, to be fair. I can understand your point of view because obviously, you know, women are more in touch with their emotional side. So I can understand that to a degree, to a point where obviously their emotions are creating that link and thus could be creating the stigmata. But then, you know, the whole thing that started off the coming of Jesus was Mary. So she had a really important part to play in the whole Christianity, the basis of Christianity.
The Blessed Mother herself.
If this is if this is of divine sort of blessing and stuff, perhaps that is the divine reminding us of the importance of the feminine.
Yeah.
Well, they are very, very important, lads. So don't underestimate us women, it's all I'm saying.
But maybe it could just be God making women think they're important.
Cheeky! We're just thinking we're important. We're not actually important, we're just thinking it.
No, yeah, you know what blokes are like. We just let women think that...
And this could be why women have more stigmata than men. Because we don't think like that.
But it is actually interesting to note sort of cases from sort of like the late 19th and through the 20th and early and 21st centuries. That sort of imbalance seems to be sort of more balancing out, and it is coming down to a more 50-50 split.
Yeah.
Well, it's because us women are becoming more empowered. We clearly don't need to express ourselves in Stigmata just to get noticed, Richard.
But, no, I mean, but then the modern man is supposed to be in touch with his feminine side as well, isn't it? So maybe that could be having an effect.
But that would sort of suggest some sort of social sort of standing. You know, this does seem to be developing with a sort of like a change in social and society sort of roles, and as we become more equal, the people that actually that suffer from this stigmata or are gifted it, the sort of male-female ratio is starting to come closer together, which is which is quite a modern sort of take, isn't it?
Well, I think one thing that struck me looking at this was the amount of people that didn't seem to be that religious from an upbringing point of view. Their fervour come later.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in life, it's not something that they sort of like. They didn't grow up with devout Roman Catholics or anything like this. It is something. This is actually, I would like to say this. Stigmata is only known from the Roman Catholic Christian side of things, isn't it?
Yes.
We couldn't find. There were references to it happening before, but we couldn't find any. We found that it didn't happen for 1,200 years after Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was linked with the Roman Catholic Christian Church. Now, is it purely and simply because we've now got a label for it?
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's also pretty much linked to Europe as well. You know, it doesn't tend to sort of travel outside of Europe much.
It was very weird when you looked at it. It was very strange when we was looking at it, but we could go to. It could be something as simple as labelling. We label it as that. It may well occur in other cultures. It may manifest in different ways, but effectively the belief system is being manifested on the body in whatever way that be. So if you looked at, say, I don't know, voodoo, for example, you might find them bleeding from points in the body that's relevant to their religion, which wouldn't be classed as stigmata because it's not reflective of the wounds of Christ on the cross. Do you know what I mean? So, it is in regards to their religion.
Yeah, because the word stigmata is a purely Christian word.
Exactly.
You know, you Google it and it will just come up with the Christian definition of it.
And we tried. We did try to find other examples in other cultures, but we were coming up a blank. But I do think sometimes that's down to knowledge of what you're searching for, quite frankly. If you don't know what you're searching for, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, you know, quite frankly. But so that's the avenue we're going down. It's mostly Roman Catholic, Christian, stigmata is where we're going with this. Let's have a little look at St. Francis of Assisi. He's the first, obviously, known person to have suffered with stigmata. Interesting character. This was the other thing. All of these people are thoroughly interesting characters, everybody. In their own right. Forget the religious bit, but they're really interesting characters. Now, in 1181, he was born. He was known for his drinking and partying and having fun and having a bit of a row.
Good old St. Francis.
Oh, yeah. Francis in his younger days was typical lad, is all I'm going to say on that one. Now, he was actually imprisoned for a year after a battle between Assisi and Perugia. Okay. And now, during this time of imprisonment, he actually started to receive visions from God. Point in question, you're imprisoned, you're basically a political war figure, okay, and he's starting to receive visions from God. We don't know the conditions under his imprisonment.
No.
I was looking at the research and he was actually ransomed, which would indicate that he was of high status when he was actually captured, because ransoming prisoners only sort of you would only ransom a prisoner if you knew you were actually going to get a good sort of financial reward back for it, whereas sort of the more common soldiers and people in combat would have been dispatched straight after. So it does indicate that he may have had some sort of social standing,
Oh, he had a very big social standing. His daddy was very important, and he was the son. He was like the the one that is like the one that you want to settle down because he just causes too much trouble for the family. So he was that. But what I'd like to know a little bit more about the conditions, because when you start receiving visions, it's either a psychological breakdown. How would we look at that now? If you've got a prisoner in prison and they're starting to receive visions, you would look at their conditions of imprisonment, their mental well-being. You would even look at how much food they're having, how much water they're having, you know, because dehydration can cause all sorts of problems. So can, you know, lack of food, condition. You know, you've got to look at all of those things. But he started
what drugs they were taking.
If he was taking drugs at that time, in 1181, this is, so obviously, oh no, a bit later than that, but, you know. But anyway, he started to receive visions from God. Now, when he was released, Christ told St. Francis to devote himself to him, repair the Christian church and live a life of poverty, which he did. He did. These visions are that powerful. He's gone from this party-loving geezer to getting drunk and having fights to being humble and poor and being devoted to God and Jesus and preaching and teaching that and repairing the church and very devoted to that lifestyle and maintained his poverty. He maintained that.
I think that's quite an easy lifestyle, because I think if you look at people these days, we all strive to be rich, but it's like, well, most people like to get a nice job, nice pay, you know, nice things surrounded them and stuff. And it's really hard work doing that.
It is.
But to be poor, that's easy, isn't it?
It is. We do live nowadays in a time of materialistic gain. We are total consumerisms, aren't we? But there is a lot to be said for living very humbly. And you don't need a lot to live on if you're prepared to take the hardship that goes with that. You know? Quite frankly. Exactly. Although I would say it would be more easier to do so in a more climate environment. If you lived in somewhere that's like generally quite warm, living in a cave's not a bad thing, right?
No, exactly.
No, you can hack that, can't you?
Whereas doing that in the UK at times, or, you know, some of the colder countries, not so much.
No.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mothers out there that would just love to just go and live in a cave for a few weeks. Yeah. And then, you know, but that said, I mean, I'm sure there's still going to be the kids that find them and go, Mum.
This is true, everybody. Now, at Christmas time in 1223, Francis actually participated in the celebration of birth. He was recreating the manger of Bethlehem at a church in Greccio, in Italy. Now, this celebration is always a big one, isn't it, in the Christian church? Christmas is a big one for the church, for that part of the church.
It's when you get all the presents, isn't it? It's going to be fun.
Yeah. We got the biggest present in the birth of Jesus. We'd just like to point that out, Richard. You know, let's not go too consumerism here. And he demonstrated his devotion to the human Jesus. Now, the following year, Francis went to a mountain retreat in Laverna, which is not far from Assisi, to celebrate the feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Mary and to prepare for St. Michael's Day. Now, this means you have to fast. Fasting. We're back to fasting, guys. This non-eating thing for 40 days. 40 days are the days that Jesus spent in the desert coming across all of his demons, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is a name for it. I can't remember it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think, you know, the trial, the tribulation or something like that.
It was something like that. But Jesus went into the desert and spent 40 days, and that's why they do the fasting for 40 days in honour of what Jesus went through, basically.
To try and replicate. Yeah.
At this time, he was praying to God on how best to please him, because that's what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he came upon references to the Passion of Christ 3 times, the Passion of Christ being the time where he was crucified.
Yes.
Right? When he prayed on the morning of the feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, which is September the 14th, he actually beheld a figure. He saw a figure coming towards him from the heavens. Saint Bonaventure.
Excellent.
Okay.
Right? This guy,
Yeah.
he wrote, oh my God, Flouncy, everybody. Ready for the flounce?
Yeah, okay, off you
Bit
go.
of religious flounce coming for you.
Cool.
Right, so St. Bonaventure wrote, as it stood above him, he saw that it was a man, and yet a seraph with 6 wings. His arms were extended, and his feet conjoined, and his body was fixed to a cross. 2 wings were raised above his head, 2 were extended as in flight, and 2 covered the whole body. The face was beautiful beyond all earthly beauty, and it smiled gently upon Francis. Conflicting emotions filled his heart, for though the vision brought great joy, the sight of the suffering and crucified figure stirred him to deepest sorrow. Pondering what this vision might mean, he finally understood that by God's providence he would be made like to the crucified Christ, not by a bodily martyrdom, but by conformity in mind and heart. Then, as the vision disappeared, it left not only a greater ardour of love in the inner man, but no less marvellously marking him outwardly with the stigmata of the crucified.
That is a tradition, a proper description of an angel as well, wasn't it? With 6 wings. So it's almost like basically saying that because his mind and heart are pretty much joined in the amount of level of worship for God, he would issue a certificate of approval, and the stigmata is the certificate.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll go with that.
That makes sense.
And that's when he got his. That's when he got his little mark. I say little marks. That's when he got his stigmatic marks, shall we say?
To prove that he was of body and mind for Christ.
Totally. It's almost like the total devotion at that point, isn't it? And it is marked by the stigmata. Now, I have to say, he had this for the rest of his life, these stigmatic markings, but he didn't revel in them. And this is another thing I think we notice with stigmatas. They're not out for personal gain. They don't go, I've been marked by Christ, look at my stigmata, worship me, I'm amazing. They don't do that. Do you know what I mean? Which kind of I think today they probably would, you know. Well, you can imagine, can't you? But he took care to hide it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But then that's being humble, isn't it?
That's the humble part. You're not doing it, or you're not doing it. That's not the right word. You're not. When you receive them, nobody who's had them receives them as a mark of being better than anybody else.
No.
That's not what this is about. This is about you're not. Oh, it's not about you. It's about you have been marked with stigmata, but it's almost like a test of faith in itself.
Yes, it's like being given something, and they'll say, you know, and how are you going to deal with this, you know, and and that's like for the stigmatarists or stigmatists, whatever they call them. That is part of the ongoing test after that as well, and after they've received it, it's they have constantly got it, and it's how they sort of deal with it. And you know, and one of the sort of tenets of Christianity is to be humble, isn't it?
Actually, that's a lesson a lot of people could probably take on board nowadays.
Yeah, not a lot of it around these days.
Doesn't seem to be, does it?
No.
Unfortunately. We are losing that, aren't we, as a race? We are losing those fundamental, help thy neighbour, be humble, don't be overly materialistic, love thyself, you know, love, be content, help each other. You know, those basic fundamental teachings do seem to be. I mean, you've only got to see it in the mask thing, that people, you're not doing that for yourself. You're doing that to stop your droplets from spreading into the air, which is protecting others from you.
Yeah.
You know, but the outcry of that has been, I'm not wearing a mask. Hold on, you're doing it for other people. You're doing it for other people, not yourself. And that's being lost. Do we think that's being lost then? These fundamental of being humble, not, you can live very humbly. You don't need all the she says, with all the trappings of modern life around her, and utilising those for personal gain, basically. Radio, selling crystals, all that sort of thing. Are we losing that? Are we losing those fundamental teachings of religion in life, do we think?
Well, yes, is the short and the long answer to that, I feel. You only have to look around and, sort of comparing it with what we're going through at the moment and stuff, and simple things. We've been asked to do something. We seem to have lost the ability to do as we are told, which is not a bad thing to do from time to time. We can't sort of go around all the time saying, oh, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, because you're going to end up in a ditch at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's good to be told what to do from time to time. It's good. It sort of makes you a better person, a more rounded and fuller person, and it diffuses, your arrogance or ignorance at times as well.
Yeah, I think as well, like we're moving more and more away from religion as well, especially in society these days. But there are sort of like glimpses of just hope for the human race.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very few and far between, I think. And it isn't until we have a major crisis that we all do pull together.
I think in the early days of the crisis, we saw it, didn't we? We saw singing in Italy. We saw your local community, people stepping up and going, right, the elderly are going to need extra help. Let's make sure that they're not, get the food parcels to them, checking on your neighbours, even if it's over the fence, and making sure they've got shopping and that they're mentally okay, and having some form of connection, even if it is by 600 foot away, clapping on the doorstep in thanks for the NHS. We did see that collective fundamentals coming forward, but as we've come through and the fear has got less for the virus, and as I say, we're just looking at it in today. I've asked the question, are we losing those fundamentals? Ultimately, we're not, are we then? Because we saw demonstrations of those. It's just the longevity of those gets lost amongst the crap that we're being fed by
it
media.
just wears in, doesn't it, I think? And people just get bored of it quick. But, in times of crisis, we all do pull together. You see it like at the Twin Towers when they fell down. And the terrorist attacks in London and other places, we do pull together in times of need, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But I think day to day, people are more concentrating on themselves and getting through the day. But yeah, as I said, like when something bad happens, we do pull together. And look at the attacks in Manchester. That wasn't just a localised concentration effort to help, it was a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
So
they are there, even though
definitely
when we looked at religion, because we are between us, we asked the question: is religion declining as a whole? Mm-hmm. And it seems to be, doesn't it?
It's evolving. It's not. As I said with the Manchester thing, although the people that committed it were Muslims, there was a lot of Muslims that were coming forward to help.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the actions of a few that damage it.
For the whole,
okay, a lot of people said it was down to religion, but that's just an excuse, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
There was lots of religious denominations that actually helped and stepped forward, taking people in and rushing out with first aid kits and bags and all that sort of thing. So it's more when something like that goes on, it's more the human race is a religion as opposed to individual
denominations.
So I think it's evolving. It's not being detracted from any one particular religion. it's just evolving. We are becoming a human race and not individuals. Individual
That's a good
religions.
point. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, and as we sort of like advance, and as Paul said, and it's evolving, and plus sort of especially today, we are a lot freer to believe in a lot more sort of things. Like you can imagine during the 15th, 16th and centuries before, you were Christian, Catholic or whatever, and that was it. You were told what to believe. And that was it. But now, sort of, we can sort of express ourselves differently and sort of look at belief independently of an arbiter saying what we should believe.
Well, also, you've got to remember the persecution that goes. If you don't believe what I believe, you'll be crucified. If you don't believe what I believe, we'll wipe you out.
There's that.
Which we don't have nowadays. We've got freedom of choice nowadays of what we can believe, particularly in the Western world. Obviously, living in the Western world, I can believe whatever I want to believe. I can go to any denomination I want to. Yeah. It's my choice. And I'm very blessed to have that choice. There's a lot of people in the world that don't have a choice. They're told what to believe, and they've got to believe, regardless of what they think. And that is still prevalent around the world. But now, in today's society, particularly in the Western society, we have a choice, and we have a plethora of choice. We have extreme to more moderate religions. We can do what we want, which is freedom, effectively, isn't it? Back in the 13th century with St. Francis, like we said, that explosion of the Christian faith, or the Roman Catholic faith, should we say, was totally blindsiding them from all other belief system they had. It's a more what's the word? It's almost like a company, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
It's run like a company. But for
a huge vested interest.
Yeah. And you had a focus point. You had a church to go to. You had a leader that was, telling you what to do. Like you say, it's we are kind of herd animals. We are sheeples. We get accused of, you're just a sheeple, wake up, and all this. But people like that. We like structure in our lives. We like, to conform and know our place in society. That is actually part of the human, condition. That's part of the human experience. Anyway, Francis, he lived for 2 years in constant pain, totally blind. He had an eye disease. That was unsuccessful, the treatment for that. And he was brought back to Assisi where he died. He was temporarily buried in the Church of San Giorgio in Assisi. And basically, he was canonised, sainted, basically, at that point. And then that was it with him. But his stigmata, his belief was so strong to manifest this stigmata. Or the other point of view would be God, came down and went, I'm going to mark you with or the angel, should I say, came down and went, you're that faithful. I'm going to mark you with, the canon, the marks of the crucifixion. I have to say, the suffering of Jesus is well documented. To put that on somebody who is devoted and cause them suffering in this life, this is the problem I have with God, this all-loving God. Why would you want somebody who is that devoted to you to suffer? And suffer they did. Don't ever get anything wrong on Stigmata. It is not pleasant. It is physically exhausting. Yeah. It physically erodes you. It is not something that is a piously wonderful, sacred thing. Although they see that, they see it as a blessing. It isn't.
No, as Richard said, it is the ultimate test, isn't it?
You don't need to test someone like that, though. They're already devoted. They're already living the life of being pious and humble. I just don't... That's the bit my personal brain, goes, well, I don't want to be punished for being that faithful and loving.
I can see where you're coming from. It sounds, it's not fair, is it?
No, it isn't fair.
We have a sense of fairness, but when things like this happen, you sort of think, well, and from the outside you look in, for people that perhaps have been afflicted with this. Let's call it an affliction for want of a better word. And you think, well, that's not fair. He's a really great bloke. He's always sort of, gone out and done good things. And why has he got this? It's not fair.
And physically, you can't. The condition is horrendous when you look at it.
It's not
good. Could it not just be a sign of reinforcement for someone dying for your sins?
I don't know. There does seem to, particularly...
Because obviously Jesus... Because those who witnessed Jesus dying for their sins took that forward in their religious beliefs, where a couple of thousand years down the line, they haven't got that to fall back on. It's just a story to them. So by giving someone else as good and humble as him, it reinforces the fact that he's now going to die for your sins.
Yeah, but sort of, I can see where you come from, Paul. But I thought the whole point of the story was he died for the sins, so we don't have to go through any of that.
Yeah. Yeah. But also, don't forget, he's not showing it off. He's not.
No.
He's hiding it. So it's purely for his own devotion, I suppose, his own affirmation.
And he remains humble.
And he remains humble in that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, oh my God, look what's happening to me. I'm such a wuss when it comes to pain, I'm not going to lie. Anyway,
I'm allergic.
I can't be doing with that. Cannot be doing with that. Now, let's have a look at Padre Pio. He's the most famous stigmata in history. And he lived between 1887 and 1968. So he's quite a modern one, really, Yeah. And he's apparently the most beloved Italian saint of the last century. He first began noticing the red wounds appearing on his hands in 1910. And basically that progressed until he experienced full stigmata in 1918. And this happened whilst he was praying in front of a crucifix in the chapel.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it becomes interesting on a paranormal front. Everyone goes, oh, hang on, why are you talking religion and theology on a paranormal show? The crossover between religion and paranormal is actually a lot closer than you think, because you don't just get the marks of Christ, you get other, and I'm going to air quote, gifts with it. Because levitation comes into this, bilocation comes into this as well. You also get the saint of sanctuary.
Yeah.
The scent of sanctuary, sorry, not the saint, got scents on the brain. The scent of sanctuary, which is that beautiful perfume.
Yeah.
Yeah, which we've explored before. I mean, even Charles Mortimer Carty, he wrote a biography of the saint, and he noted that this smell, and he couldn't pin it down. It was an incense of violets, lilies, roses, tobacco was in there, but this scent, this smell, is something that's very much associated with holy relics and with saints, right?
Yeah.
And also with the people that get stigmata.
Yeah.
You wouldn't expect that. You would not expect that, because you would expect blood, and blood is a horrible smell.
Yeah.
I'm sure Paul can attest.
Yes, definitely.
It certainly does if you're around a lot of it. Yeah, I sort of, it does have that sort of scent to it, doesn't it? It's very subtle, but it does have it.
I'm choking on my water. Sorry. Oh dear. Now, oh dear. Padre Pio has got, shall we say, detractors as well. He's not. There are a lot of people who think he was a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that completely believe in him. Right? But when you look at other gifts that he was supposed to have by location, it's where you're seen in two places at the same time.
Doppelganger, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, that's completely different.
Well, it could be sort of, I was sort of like trying to relate it to the paranormal sort of field. You've got biolocation and sort of what's similar in the paranormal realm, doppelgangers.
Bilocation is actually a thing in itself. There's a very famous case of a woman. She was a school teacher, and she lost her job many, many times because it would freak the students out, because she would be teaching a class but then appear in the garden at the same time. Exactly the same person, whereas doppelganger is almost a clone of yourself.
Right.
Right, so there's the difference between the two. So bilocation is where you're in one place, but you appear in exactly the same form, and you interact in two places at once, basically. Levitation, obviously, is flying, basically.
More or less, yeah.
Or, being able to fly. The smell, this fantastically odour of sanctity, and talking in tongues as well. Is a mystical language, which between us three last night, the conversation kind of went. We would actually, if anybody was coming to us and talking in tongues, we wouldn't go, "Oh my God, they're like blessed by the Jesus, by God." We would go, "Oh my God, hashtag they're possessed." And then the conversation went. The church would use that as a sign of somebody being possessed and look maybe towards an exorcism. Yes. But this isn't like that. This is something that's very similar. But another case, which we'll come to in a bit, actually looked at this, and there is a difference. And talking in tongues can come from good spirit and bad spirit. It's not it's an open channel, basically. It's not always a good thing. But we'll come on to that in a bit, because there's a very, very modern case that talks very candidly about this. But we're talking about Pedro Pio. Now, where do we start with him? He's again a very enigmatic character. Not many people believe that his wounds are supernatural, whereas you do have a lot of people that think he is. But amongst his detractors, the two popes and the founder of Milan's Catholic University actually think he was self-mutilating.
Yes, and so that's quite something, So he was somebody that obviously highbrow church people knew of him or sort of visited him and stuff, and they came away sort of thinking, hang on a minute, something's not quite right. No. Something must have triggered something in their sort of, they didn't automatically turn up and think, oh, this is going to be amazing, and sort of they believed in it before they went. They sort of went to have a look, possibly, and then made their opinions and came away.
But isn't there a branch of Christianity that does that self-mutilation because they whip themselves or something, don't they?
Yeah.
Again, this is sort of like sort of.
And again, that's quite representative of the whole Jesus on the cross as well.
Yeah, sort of like priests and bishops will like wear hair shirts and stuff, for them to constantly remind them of the discomfort of the sort of like the passion of Christ, So yes, and there's that still goes on, even self-flagellation, and I believe that some sects in the Catholic Church wear sort of like a studded sort of like garter around their upper thigh at various points during the day to remind them, which is uncomfortable, but to remind them of the suffering of Christ.
I thought they only wore garters at the weekend.
Yeah, it's got a name, but it fails. It fails me at the moment.
I think it was highlighted in Dan Brown's book, wasn't it? The Da Vinci Code.
Well, quite extremely.
One of the extreme sides of Catholicism, of self-flagellation, was actually highlighted in that book. But anyway, Pedro was canonised by Pope John Paul II in 2002, and he died, this is Pio, died in 1968. He never confessed to faking his stigmata, but when you look at his writings and his work, there was an earlier stigmatic called Gemma Galgani, who, when you look at the two bodies of work together, they're very, very close. So whether he plagiarised her work, or, that person's work, or whether or not he came up with the same thing because it was just what stigmatas do, I don't know.
Well, I suppose he could have read up, thought, think, well, I've got this condition, let's see if I can find out, sort of more about it, and he could have came across her doing that, his own research. It's a difficult one. I mean,
he claimed ignorance on that. He said he couldn't explain it, and he's actually put it down to a miracle. He actually put it down to a miracle when he was confronted with that. He said, "It must be a miracle because I don't know this person. I don't know this person's work, and yet it's incredibly similar."
Yeah,
but we've had that too. Actually, I've written a piece and I got accused of plagiarism and I didn't know anything about the piece of work that the person was talking about. So it is possible because, I know, everybody else can believe me or not, I don't care. I know I didn't know that person's work before I wrote the piece that I wrote.
Yeah.
I came to the same conclusions that person did and wrote a piece on it, but apparently it was that close I plagiarised it. I know I didn't. But that could easily have happened to Padre Pio.
Yeah. Yeah, because these sort of religious figures, they're quite learned, so they're quite, and you can see, if you get a group of religious people or group of people with a very sort of a passion and interest, and they are going to think along similar lines. It's inevitable.
And we have this in the paranormal. We're all focused on exactly the same thing, aren't we? We're, going out, experiencing paranormal phenomena, trying to work it out, doing research in a lot of very similar areas. But, there's a huge body of work out there, but at some point, there's going to be a crossover. Your thought patterns are going to go down various thought patterns that other people may well have had. So when you're looking exactly the same in the religious field, you're focusing on a story that's initially, the alpha story is the Bible, There's only so much different thought patterns you can have about that. At some point, you're going to have the same thought patterns. I don't know. I can't call it one way or the other. It's incredibly fascinating to me, though, that they were like, well, you must have plagiarised that. Your stigmata isn't real. You're self-mutilating. But he had other things. It's not just one thing he had. He had bilocation. He had the gift of flying, the gift of talking in tongues. He had this sanctuary. There are other things beyond the marks.
He was the original Superman.
There is that. So far, I think one thing's for sure, the devotion of these men, just the two men we've looked at, is second to none. I don't think there's anything I have been so devoted to that, I don't know, it's a very strange one, isn't it? Having not got that level of devotion for a particular religion, I can't understand it.
No, I've never really looked too much into Stigmata. I mean, obviously I've heard of it. I know a little bit about it, but that's about the extent. So actually reading through this research that you've done for the show, absolutely fascinating. And I just didn't realise that it goes down so many routes.
There's so many paranormal bits in this.
Yeah.
But I think, and again, I've said this time and time again, if you want to start looking at original alpha story paranormal phenomena, got to look at religion.
Absolutely.
You kind of have to start there. Because that a lot of, even down to the modern day ufology, there are links with religious iconography. We talked about iconography at the beginning of the show. There is links in iconography of religious glass windows and things like that. And stories, you've only got to look at the birth of Jesus. Angels came down from above.
Yeah, I do think religion does have a big part to play in the paranormal. Because, even if you took the stance that we create paranormal activity, there's so many religions out there that are focused enough that they could create a tulpa-type spirit.
Yeah.
So they would only be affected by that denomination. So when you go out and do your investigations and you find out what spirits are causing whatever issue, I mean, I've found I had a private case, and one of the spirit didn't really make much sense to me, to be fair. But when I looked into it, I found that there was a lot of Norse mythology surrounding what this lady was experiencing. So I sort of concluded that it was a Norse spirit. So we actually spoke to a parapsychologist that I know and spoke to them about it, and they said, yeah, okay, use these runes, use these stones, because they are Norse. Because if we went in there and started going like the power of Christ compels you, and
Yeah.
it's going to laugh at you, going, "Well, I'm not that religion, so that's just words to me. That's rubbish." You have to tackle it with its own religious source,
Its
basically.
own belief system.
Yeah, yeah, and you've got to do the research to find that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to fight like with like.
Yeah, exactly.
Something it understands. If you go with it at something, potentially it doesn't understand, it's not going to have any effect on it.
On that note, we've actually come to the end of the first half of the show, boys.
Wow.
Oh, that was quick.
It's going so quick. Always is when we talk theology.
I've 2 pages of research.
I know, right? Because when we've been talking about this for several nights whilst preparing for this show, those conversations have been going on for 3 or 4 hours easily.
Yeah.
So we are understanding that we're not going to cover everything. But when we come back after the break, we're going to continue with this fascinating topic. We'll be right back after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PAUK Radio Network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Now, before the break, we looked at a couple of cases of stigmata and the phenomena and the theology that surrounds it. And as always, we go down different rabbit holes and try and come back to topic. So we talked about Padre Pio, towards the end of the show, the first half of the show, and how his work seemed to reflect or plagiarise Gemma Galgani. Now, she was born in Tuscany and suffered with tuberculosis of the spine with an aggravated curvature, so she's not a well lady herself. She considered herself cured by a vision of the young Saint Gabriel Possenti, but she couldn't obtain a certificate of health which enabled her to enter a convent. So that stopped her physical disabilities, stopped her from entering the convent. But it shows that she had a belief system set in, that's what she wanted.
Yeah.
That was her belief system.
There's certainly a grounding there, isn't there? Mm-hmm. That's interesting in itself.
Now, she experienced many abnormal things from June 1899 onwards, including stigmata in her hands and feet. Now, this was examined quite carefully by her confessor and biographer, the Passionist Fra Germano. I suppose that means Fraulein.
I don't know. Yeah, it could be Fraulein Father. I don't know, isn't it? I mean,
Now,
or Father Germano.
Yeah. Well, Passionist kind of says it itself. I think the further he's got in regards to it. But what's interesting about her stigmata is they began to appear at about 8 p.m. on a Thursday and lasted until 3 p.m. on the Friday. So they come and go, right? Now, no pain preceded their apparition, just a deep recollection. So she remembered having it and then they appeared.
Could she just have dreamt that then?
Or she believed?
Well, yeah, she believed she dreamt it.
Or is it a trigger? Like like when you have trauma, something can trigger that without you even realising it.
Yeah, I suppose.
And then the physical manifestation of that trauma comes out. So could this be past life trauma that's manifesting if she recollected?
Well, yeah, that's another possibility, isn't it?
Yeah, there's certainly been cases of sort of like reincarnation cases, haven't they, where sort of marks and stuff have appeared and similar to sort of certain individuals that they claim to be from a past life. So, yeah, there's certainly that aspect to it.
These manifested, first of all, it started as a discoloration on the back and palm of each hand, so it's both sides of her hand.
Mm-hmm.
Then a rent in the flesh under the skin, which then split. A deep laceration was observed, at least usually the holes above and below corresponded, and the perforations seemed complete. It's hard to judge this because they kept filling up with blood and partly flowing and partly congealing. And actually, if you're looking at a wound that's causing someone pain, you don't want to stick something through it to see if it goes all the way through, do you? It's not really the done thing.
That's not something I would have done.
It's interesting she had it on front and back of the hands. From what I can gather, sort of looking at these other stigmatarists and stuff, they tend to only have it in the palms of their hands. You know, it's interesting she's got it on both sides, sort of like, which does indicate, you know, the nails passing straight through.
Very much so. Now, basically, he measured the diameters and shapes of the wounds and noted that a few times a sort of fleshy swelling, like a nail head, about an inch across, covered the wounds in the hands, though not those in the feet.
So, was her stigmata? Was the blood actually? That sounds like the blood's just pooling under the skin, doesn't it? Like a blood blister, I suppose you could.
No, it says it's partly flowing, partly congealing.
Oh, right.
So it has split the flesh.
Mm-hmm.
For her, it has done that. Now, he says that directly after the Friday ecstasy was over, the flow of blood from all 5 wounds ceased immediately. The raw flesh healed, and the lacerations healed too. And at least by Sunday, not a vestige remained of the deep cavities. So hers was very much linked to her worship of that time.
Well, and it's interesting to note, you know, it's traditionally believed in the Christian canon. You look at Easter, I mean, Christ was crucified on the Friday and rose on the Sunday.
What I found interesting about this was it is more, when you read about that, you kind of do see more of a belief system manifestation than you do a blessing from Christ. Like with Assisi, apparently he had it all the time. They were there all the time. Yeah.
This is what I generally think of as stigmatarists. You know, they tend to have it permanently once they get it. You know, they have it permanently. But this case here certainly seems to be, it seems to be following a pattern of some sort.
Yeah.
The fact that it goes away and comes back. You know,
they
on
call
a weekly basis,
a static, don't they call it? An ecstatic state, where you're that involved in the celebration of Christ that it appeared then. And that's where you see, I see a belief system playing out in a manifestation, power of the mind maybe.
Yeah, because we certainly know that your sort of mental state or sort of agitation, anxiety and stuff can bring out sort of rashes and stuff, for want of a better word. You know, sort of generally, that's probably the most mildest form. I mean, whether it can actually go to this extreme, I'm still a bit sort of, you know, can it? I mean, and you look at this case, and perhaps the evidence is pointing, yes, it can.
Very much so. I think the other thing that comes out of this is when they started looking at the iconography that she habitually saw, that she particularly worshipped towards, her wounds reflected the iconography, not anything else. So, like, say because if you look at different visions of, different iconography of Christ, there's lots of different subtle differences in the iconography of it. Right? Yeah. Different positions on the cross, different wounds, different sides. The mark on the side is different sides. There's subtle differences depending on who's painted it, basically.
Yeah.
You know, who's made the iconography. And Stigmata seems to reflect the iconography they worship.
Yeah, so it's something they are exposed to, which could be, you know, sort of like their own sort of personal crucifix and stuff that's made in a certain way, and they're manifesting that within themselves. It's particularly interesting, I mean, with the wound in the side, for some stigmatarists, it can vary from left to right. can't it?
And also the cross. Sometimes it's a traditional cross, and sometimes it's a Y-shaped cross.
Yeah, I mean, in some sort of denominations, certainly Eastern Orthodox churches, yeah.
The amount of nails is different on some. It's very, very different depending on the iconography, and sometimes these are very subtle differences. But when you are tying it with stigmata, those differences seem to be very prevalent in how it manifests.
Mm-hmm.
Is it
I
self-suggestion?
think that could just be down. Yeah, it could just be down to what sort of religion they were brought up in, I suppose, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's it. The conversation now and stuff, and what we've sort of like gone through to this point in the show, yeah, it certainly we are certainly seem to be coming towards a more suggestion sort of state, and sort of a state of mind as opposed to a sort of a miraculous gift.
I know. It is a mindset, isn't it? It is a mindset. It's not hysteria, because they're not hysterical. You talk to them, they're very rational, and they would pass any psychological assessment. Do you know what I mean? It's not a hysteria. It is a complete mindset, belief system that is there. It is unshakable.
Which does indicate something very deep set in the psyche.
Totally. It's, you know, when you start looking at it, it is incredible. I know the concentration it needs sometimes, and the mindset you need to go through to get yourself into regards of a ritual, and that is quite laborious and hard to maintain. Its practice takes that. Now, bearing in mind, they're not doing that sort of thing. That's just on a general working in that way. But when you look at somebody who's piously religious on a day-to-day basis and completely in that mindset 24/7, then it isn't a hard leap of assumption that they would be able to manifest this for themselves.
Yeah.
Because that level of mindset, that level of concentration on one devotion through a lot of years. Through a lot of years. I mean, and going back to the skull experiment, to manifest a phenomena, which they did, took a long time for them sitting in a group with complete concentration on the task in hand. We've seen this before. We've seen it. We've seen it played out in the Phillips experiment, the skull experiment. That's not something we can dismiss out of hand, that this is not that this is a blessing from God. We have to consider that, because we've done it in other arenas, of concentration and mindset. So we can't underestimate the impact of the mental power of that.
I would totally agree with you. The only sort of odd thing around with her, Gemma, is that she was very young when she died as well. She was only, 25 when she died. So this sort of happened, a lot of stigmatics, it seems they do sort of live a while, they seem to get it sort of midlife sort of onwards, and it sort of seems to, but this girl seems to have had it all in a very condensed period of time, and quite young in life as well, which is unusual.
Yeah, but she did have a massive medical condition underlying that too.
Yes, yeah, and I don't think that can be sort of ignored either.
No. Now, we did look at the medical side to see if there was an actual medical explanation for stigmata beyond the psychological, because you don't know, there might be. We didn't know this until we looked into this. Now, we did come across a site that said that they had kind of debunked all of stigmata as being hematohydrosis. But this has been widely studied. It's quite a rare condition, and the cause of this is actually unknown. But they say that there is evidence that acute stress can cause this condition. Mm-hmm. Right, basically, the condition is where various blood vessels gather near the skin during times of stress. So, in times of severe anxiety, the vessels will actually rupture, and it causes the blood to pass through the skin in the form of sweat. Now, that seems more general, not localised. However, if you put a belief system on that of Jesus on the cross, for example. Oh, Marley's disagreeing with me. All right, darlings. I'll take your point. Maybe the hematodhydrosis does actually occur where you believe it's going to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually remember watching a video from one of these charismatic and evangelical type churches where they had a famous stigmatist was coming in who didn't have it all the time, and they got themselves into a fervour, and he was sort of standing there and clapping and sort of, he got himself quite worked up. And in the palms of his hands, they actually filmed this. You could see sort of blood starting to come out, but it was very subtle, I must admit, and that was quite a process in itself to trigger that. So,
Well, they've witnessed this under like death row inmates who have experienced past trauma. They've witnessed this hematodhydrosis in those kind of cases. That must be incredibly stressful, no matter what crime.
Well, yeah, thinking about it, yeah. I mean, if you want to go, to see people in stressful places, perhaps death row would be a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. Now, other ways of getting this hematodhydrosis can be excessive exertion. As you put your body under that much stress, you can. But again, this seems more general. Blood seeming to seep from your pores, and generally more than anything else. And complications with menstruation, which may be why it affects more women than men.
Okay.
So we can't discount that. That is a possible explanation for some of it.
Well, if that's all the things you have to do to get it, I'm never going to have it.
Exactly right. Oh dear. Well, you don't. Yeah, who knows? Trachoma, infection of the eyes, conjunctivitis, and blindness. Now they think that this is what afflicted Saint Francis of Assisi, was trachoma, which is why he was blinded. Nothing to do with God, and that was an actual eye infection. And that's generally not a thing with stigmata. They also put it down to malaria, which again is a blood infection, but it doesn't explain. I don't know any people with malaria that it's come out in the marks of stigmata, so I think that's a reach on that one. I think it comes out in a lot of other kinds of symptoms rather than marks of stigmata. There's another condition called purpura, which is bruising on the skin. But again, that seems more of a general thing rather than in the areas of where the wounds of Christ would be. But if you overlay it with a huge, massive belief system in regards to the wounds of Christ, then maybe it would appear there rather than being general, because your mind is manifesting that alongside the condition, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you sort of think the places where it is and where stigmata does occur, I mean, they are sort of like forehead, palms of the hand, the feet, and on extreme cases, the back as well, with the like scourging. I mean, they are sort of places you would feel that are sort of like blood vessels and stuff are relatively close to the skin, aren't they? Sort of where they sort of back up against your like rib cage and your feet when they sort of like they're quite bony. There's not a lot of skin down there as such, so you can sort of see that the veins and blood would be closer to the surface.
Now, going on, I looked then at crucifixion. Now, our imagery of the Passion of Christ is very strong. We've seen it in movies. You can't get away from the Passion of Christ, can you? When he's on the cross and what he went through to that point, and it's horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And it was all designed. Crucifixion is all designed to break a person, and because he was believed to be the King of the Jews, they had to totally break him. In every way possible, which is what they did effectively. And crucifixion in general is incredibly, it's cruel. Absolutely cruel. Now, in Rome, people who were condemned to crucified were scourged beforehand, which is basically the whipping, taking the skin off the back, and it was across the back, the buttocks, and the legs. Right? Yeah. Now, this would weaken the victim, cause deep wounds, severe pain, and bleeding. Right? Gonna nasty.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to sit down for a week.
I know that feeling. Then the victim possibly would faint during this procedure, and actually at this point a lot of people died, right?
Yes, good, yeah. I mean, a good flogging, is not that uncommon.
They were then made to carry the crossbar of a cross. Everyone thinks that it was the whole cross that Jesus carried. It wasn't. It would have just been the patibulum. I think that's said like that.
Yeah, which is the crossbar. Yeah, they would have had it tied around their shoulders, wouldn't they? And transported it to the site of execution themselves.
And don't underestimate how heavy that is either. Yeah. Sometimes the Roman soldiers would hurt the victim further by cutting off a body part, such as a tongue, or blinding him. Mm-hmm. There were even cases of sometimes the victim's child would be killed and then hung around their neck while they carried this crossbar. Mm-hmm. Then they were then put onto the cross. Right, the cross was lifted and affixed to the upright post of the cross. Sometimes this was just a tree, I would say. It's not always the traditional actual cross that you would see. And then they're naked whilst they're on this cross as well, so you've got all their belongings are then strewn amongst the commoners, so they're witnessing all of this go on as well. And now this is the thing I found thoroughly interesting, how you're affixed to a cross. The nailing of the cross is a bit of a misnomer. On the straight bit, the upright, there would be a plaque which would take a little of the weight. Because if you nail through the palm, it's going to just rip out because of the weight. Yeah. So there were two ways of doing it. They wouldn't necessarily nail through the palm. They would nail through the arm, the forearm. There's two bones in your forearm, and they would go through that. It doesn't hit any major arteries, so you're not going to bleed to death. So they would nail there, but they would also tie you. Yeah. Sometimes it's not nailed at that point, it's tied. And you're sort of like hanging over your arms are sort of like bent over the cross, and you're tied on by your forearm, by your bicep bit. That's where you're tied. Your feet, underneath your buttocks, you've got a small plinth. It's not something you're sat on, it's just enough to take a little of the weight. And then your feet are either side, not in front, they're either side of the upright. And at that point, they then nail through. But they don't nail through just with a nail. They nail through with a piece of wood. So sort of like, if you're nailing into a wall, sometimes you need a raw plug to hold it.
Yeah. To hold it in. I mean, basically, you would have like a big square wood. It's like a washer. You're nailing. You're nailing through the wood, through the flesh, and then into the wood again. So you've got that sort of like support to hold it all there. Because again, if not, it would just rip out.
And they do that through the ankle bone. Mm-hmm. Right. So you're not closed-legged. Your legs are slightly open because you're either side of this thing. If that's not enough, you can't breathe. You're not dying from being crucified. The wounds that are inflicted on the cross are not designed to kill. This is designed to cause as much length of suffering as possible. You're up there for however long. Now, when you breathe, you need to be able to raise yourself up to exhale. You can inhale hanging there, but you can't exhale. So you have to sort of like lift yourself up a little bit to exhale. And effectively, what happens is you die of asphyxiation because you can't maintain that. Bearing in mind, your feet are nailed. There's pain.
Yes.
To do this.
You've got the whole weight of the body, sort of basically facing forward and in a slightly crouched position.
Mm-hmm. Now, they did actually do experiments on this, German researchers. tied volunteers by their wrists to a cross and then monitored their respiratory and cardiovascular activity. This happened in the 1960s. Within 6 minutes, the volunteers had trouble breathing. Now, obviously, they've not got any other wounds. They are just tied to a cross. Right? Their pulse rates had doubled and their blood pressure had plummeted. They had to stop the experiment after 30 minutes because of the pain that was being caused just by the position that they were on whilst they were on the cross. Can you imagine that? We want to do an experiment. We want to see the physical effects of crucifixion on the body. And that's been granted approval.
Well, yeah,
we now need victims. Who do you want to put on the cross?
You can imagine the university students queuing up to do that. They think, we're getting an afternoon off lectures if we go and help Mr. Professor out with his experiment.
Yeah, so 30 minutes later, you're thinking, oh my God, get me down.
This is not what I signed up for.
But then you've not got the other wounds, have you?
No.
That were inflicted. Bearing in mind, you've been scourged within an inch of your life. You're physically traumatised on just about every level. That's without anything else that they've done to you before they put you up there, like blinding you or cutting your tongue out or any of those
dehydrated and everything, because I very much doubt they fed you or anything beforehand.
Oh, gosh, no, definitely not. Now, sometimes they allowed people to, on a sponge, they would give them things like anaesthetics. Not modern day anaesthetics, you understand, so it would be myrrh or frankincense, drinks, things like that would, help at least deaden the pain, at least. So when you look at the wounds of Christ, they don't match with what we know historically in regards to crucifixion. The wounds of Christ are in the palms of his hands, they're on the front of his feet. Yeah. Not through the ankle bones. They're not through the forearm. They're through the palms of his hands. They may well have put a crown of thorns on his head, mocking him for being king of the Jews. We don't know. We don't know if that's factually accurate or not. There were thorny bushes around at that time, so it's quite possible. And the spear wound happened post-death, when he died, after he died. And it looks, from the explanations that have been found, they said that water and blood came out, so it looks like they actually pierced a lung, because if you're dying from asphyxiation, basically you're drowning. Yeah. So it looks like they pierced a lung, so it's high. It's not in his side, it's quite high under his rib cage. But when we look at stigmata and the marks of stigmata, that's not evident as factually historically correct of how they would crucify. If you're going on the general method of crucifixion for all how they did it generally, I can't say they would have changed their method their modus operandus for Jesus. No. You know what I mean? I think it was a tried and tested method, everybody. But the iconography shows a different picture of that crucifixion. It does. That is where the marks of the stigmata come out in the iconography.
Interesting, yeah, and it certainly shows. I mean, what these stigmata are displaying is the stylised form of the suffering of Christ, aren't they? Yeah, it is the stylised modern rendition of it, because going through what you've just gone through with the description of crucifixion and stuff, I mean, the person would have been an absolute mess.
I mean, and that's just a general one. That what I've outlined is just a general form of crucifixion. With Jesus, they psychologically broke him. Well, they didn't actually. That's the point, isn't it? They didn't actually psychologically break him. He had his belief right to the end. He put his soul into God's hands. He cried out into God's hands. I commit my soul, or something along those lines, didn't he? But the Romans did everything they could to bring this man down, to break that belief system in him. And all it did was reaffirm that faith for him. This is why the passion of Christ is so iconic for people, because no matter what he went through, no matter how horrendous that was, and it is emotive to every single person, no matter what denomination you are, you cannot read that story or watch that imagery that people have taken and made films with and stuff like that without feeling that nobody can deny that, right? Mm-hmm. No matter what denomination you believe in, you watch The Passion of Christ, the Mel Gibson film, you're in floods. It is graphic, and it should be graphic because that's what, allegedly, a man went through to prove that he was the Son of God. Mm-hmm. Or, as Paul says, God himself.
Yeah. Mm.
Certainly food for thought.
That in itself, I think, is the point, isn't it, of that point of belief. He couldn't be broken even on the cross. If you have a belief system in that as a religion, if you have a belief system in that as a religion, there's your yardstick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's your yardstick. So let's have a look at Emil. No, what's his name? Sudak. Right, he's a modern day stigmata. Sudarts, I think is how you say it. Now, he's called to the priesthood in his early 20s. He attended a seminar by Emil Tardif. Sudak was ordained on June the 29th in 1998, and actually was assigned to a parish on the island of Pag. He is very active, he's very busy, he's very devout, but 11 months, this is very quick, 11 months after his ordination, he developed a cross, the first mark of the stigmata, and it was the form of a cross that was imprinted on his forehead. He was sent to a clinic by the bishop. He was sent to the Gemelli Clinic in Rome. Now, that's the hospital that actually treats the Pope, right? So they're used to dealing with religious icons all by itself. You can imagine, oh, God, we've got the Pope in. Oh, we've got a stigmata today. He remained there. Now, some of the timings of these things kind of like freaked me out a little bit because he was in there for 40 days. Weird, right?
Yeah, that is quite... I know.
But did he make 40 nights as well?
Well, yeah, 40 days and 40 nights.
39 nights and 40 days.
I don't know, but they say 40 days, which, is quite iconic in its own right. He was actually subjected to intense investigation by a team of experts from a variety of medical disciplines. He underwent numerous tests and procedures to see if they could explain why this bleeding cross, appeared on his forehead, right? He is... Okay. And we're talking 1998 here. 1999, sorry. Right? This is modern. This ain't that long ago. This is 21 years ago.
So a cross appeared on his head and he was bleeding?
Yes.
Could he just have been... because they use anointing oil. Could he not just been allergic to that?
They would have looked at all that, I would have thought. Because he went along a lot of medical disciplines, numerous tests and procedures. Yeah. So that you would think basics. Is he allergic to something? You would think, wouldn't you? I don't know what test they did, but 40 days, that's a lot of testing going on.
Yeah, definitely.
Right, the final report from the clinic was that he was a sound mind and body, right? So there's nothing wrong with him. He's done psychological tests and physical tests, but they could not confirm that the cross was of divine origin, but they could also state there was no known medical explanation for the formation of that cross. So they've literally dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's. They have done everything they can to try and debunk this. Couldn't. But then obviously on the same flip side, they can't say, oh, it's divine either, because they just don't know. They just can't find an explanation for it at this point.
Yeah, to me that just says that there is a medical explanation, they just couldn't find it.
A year and a half later, he received the wounds of Christ on his wrists, feet and side. He received this on October the 4th, which is the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi.
That's also my brother's birthday.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Now that's interesting.
Yeah. My brother's going to get it.
Oh, let's hope not. It's not very religious, your brother, though, is he?
No, that's true.
Now, nowadays, he's still alive, this guy, still alive, absolutely fascinating young man, I suggest you go look him up. He doesn't seek accolade. I was quite shocked. I'd never heard of him before. So,
no,
we was like, he's still
him,
alive. We were like, he's still alive. He's actually a retreat leader at the Bethany Retreat House on the island of Lozenge,
yeah, with a squiggle above the S, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's very gifted for art. He creates prints, religious iconography prints, obviously. He's still a very young man.
Yeah. It's interesting to note that he's received the other sort of like stigmata, like particularly on his wrists as opposed to in the palms, which you would traditionally associate. That's interesting. And that sort of, but if he's sort of like modern, sort of alive today and sort of brought up, sort of upbringings like us and with the knowledge we have, I mean, it has been known for for a little while now that, sort of crucifixion victims were nailed through the wrists as opposed to the palms of the hands. I mean, he would have known this beforehand, before he actually got this. So again, you sort of,
it's the power of his belief, isn't it?
Yeah. So his sort of like stigmata has sort of come up to date. It's more keeping with the times, with what we know now.
Very much so. But when people go, there's obviously there's a huge amount of people that wish to be in his presence because of his stigmata. He says, if you're here for that, you've come to the wrong place. We're here to worship God. That is all it is. It's not about me. This is not about me.
Yeah.
I've got this, but that's incidental, actually. So if you come here to witness that, that's not what we're about. This is about worshipping God. He takes himself. There's an interview, we'll get this shared to the Paranormal Concept even. I'm going back in history. In the Paranormal Concept page, we'll share the interview that he's done. And it's worth a read because he is honouring all of those qualities we talked about in the first half of the show. He's very humble. Yeah. He's not about him. This is about worship of God. It is about being God-fearing. Look at the power of God. Look at what God can do. Live in the right way. He is showing you the way, and that's what we should do. I'm not here. I'm not got this for my own personal gain. This is not about personal gain. And it's an incredible interview when you read about it. This is a modern day, still alive stigmata that is still worshipping God.
Yeah.
In his way. And it's just incredible. He goes to retreats. He takes, time out. He needs that quiet. And it's funny, isn't it? Because in this time, we've had that time of quiet recently. Yeah. We've all had that. And a lot of truth came out of that time, didn't it? Personal truth.
Yeah, it did, yeah.
And this guy is saying it's important to do that. It's important to retreat. That's what retreat is. It's not a time for a retreat to Ibiza for parties and fun. It's a retreat for quiet contemplation, time away, time to reconnect with yourself and your truth, God's truth. We learn through lockdown that materialistic things don't make you happy. Seeing your family makes you happy. That got denied.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, everyone listening to this, and that is something, they can resonate with, sort of, if we've learned anything, it is the basics, the people you didn't think mattered do actually matter.
I think that impact of not being able to see your mum and give her a hug and have that physical contact was traumatic to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Some people didn't care, but it's traumatic to a lot of people. And the extended time that went on for as well. It's that connection, that desire to be with love. And it is, isn't it? It distills down to love, doesn't it? Love in its purest form.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, Paul, I want you to explain to people how you explained it to me, because I was saying Jesus was a person, and you were saying, no, he was God. And I said, no, you've got the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And you went, no, they're all the same.
They are, yeah.
I want you to explain that for our listeners, that theology.
But basically, the way I discussed, because I done one of these Christian basics courses to understand more about Christianity and the faith and stuff. And the priest said that God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are all God, just in different forms. And we was trying to get our heads around that. And I actually then turned around and said, well, it's like water, isn't it? You've got water in its pure form, which would be God. Then you've got ice as the Son, and steam as the Holy Spirit. They're all types of water, just in different forms. And that, for me, makes perfect sense. And that's how I think of it.
Whereas I always saw them as three separate entities before we were... Because, say, we've had an awful lot of discussion about this behind the scenes on this particular topic. We've gone down lots of different avenues. We've argued theology, which we're not theologians, I suppose is the expression. But it's introduced a lot of concepts to us that off the back of one thing, and all actually down to our own personal belief systems in regard to God. And I was saying, from my perspective as a spiritualist, I see a lot of concepts, the teachings from a religious perspective are very reminiscent to me of what we talk about in regard to, from a spiritualist perspective, how we view love and how we view ourselves and know thyself and, those concepts.
So I think for you, it'd be more like God would be the energy in the cosmos.
Yeah.
Then the human energy.
Yeah.
Or the spirit or soul in each of us would be God the Son. And the Holy Spirit would be spirit energy.
Yeah. So you'd be almost
they're all types of energy, but they're the same.
But they're all interlinked. They're all connected.
Yeah. And that's why Jesus is God. Well, that's how the Christians perceive Jesus.
Yeah, if you look at it like that, from sort of like a spiritual sort of thing, and as they say, and we're all made from stardust.
It's all connected. It's all interlinked. And all right, it might be terminology, and the way it's put forward in a story is different, but it all boils down to the same thing. It all boils down to the same qualities, doesn't it? And stigmata, I think, when I was looking at this, I just think it's the ultimate expression, isn't it, of your devotion. I do think it's more of a psychological manifestation of something. I've looked into physical healing. The power of suggestion is incredible. We talk about it. You can look at it in regards to placebo tests they do on medical studies, to see if the drug actually works. They give 50% of the people the actual drug, and 50% of people, they tell them it's the drug, but it's actually a placebo. And they see if there is an actual difference, whether it is power of suggestion. We've seen studies like that happen. You can't take power of suggestion out of it. You can't take the placebo effect out of it. That in itself is an incredible example of the power of the mind. What's your thoughts, isn't it? You talk to yourself negatively, and negative things manifest around you because you're focused on that.
Yeah. Put
yourself in a mindset of love and respect for others, and you'll find that comes back to you. And be mindful about that. If somebody isn't responding to that energy that you're emitting, then don't have them around you. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? It's incredible. I find when we look at topics in that link to the paranormal, I find the crossovers incredible with various subjects. I never would have thought I would have looked into holy relics, stigmata, the odour of sanctity, and the depth that we've looked at in the last few weeks, and come away with so many paranormal links. Another gift that this Sudak talks about is the talking in tongues. We referenced it at the first part of the show. Now, talking in tongues has got a very fancy word, Richard. It's been throwing this at us all week.
Oh, I was throwing it out last night in the chat, wasn't I? Glossolalia is the correct term for it, yeah. But speaking in tongues is sort of like the Christian sort of word for it, yeah.
Normally, from our perspective, normal, everyday, normal people perspective, if someone started talking in a strange language, we would think they were possessed.
Yeah.
Yes.
But this happens in regards to religion as well. This stigmata, this modern day stigmata talks about this. He talks about, there are 3 forms, aren't there, Richard? You talk to us about that.
Yeah, there's 3 forms. There's sort of like one form of speaking of glossolalia is when the individual actually speaks in a known language but unknown to themselves. Like if I was to sit here now and start talking in Chinese, I mean, I don't know Chinese, never had. You know, that is one aspect. And then there's the second aspect of glossolalia is when you speak in a recognised language, and extinct language, and this is usually around sort of biblical language and languages like Hebrew and, well, Hebrew is still spoken, but like Aramaic would be one. It's not actually spoken now, but it was. And then you have the third one, which is probably the most common one, which is the babbling, which is and when you hear people actually do this, they are just literally, it sounds like they're babbling. You know, they're just talking away.
Yeah,
and not actually,
I've actually witnessed someone do that.
And not actually making anything coherent whatsoever.
Yeah.
And that is one that, and usually in the Christian form, that takes somebody would do that, and then somebody will interpret what they've said.
Mm.
Yeah,
I just remember watching someone do that, and I wasn't really into the paranormal like I am now back then, and it was like, what the hell is that bloke doing? He's mental. But obviously, back then, I didn't know what I know now, sort of thing. And yeah, it was definitely an experience, but it was like he was possessed. But they say it's a good possession.
Yeah, when they say it's the blessing of the Spirit.
But then I think, sometimes the church would then turn around and go, well, talking to dead people is wrong, but surely the people that's talking in tongues are doing that. That's the bit that gets me.
Mm. And there's precedent before of all the sort of aspects we've looked at on the Stigmata, sort of like the religious iconography, which is principally a Christian base. This seems to be a whole Christian phenomenon. The actual aspect of speaking in tongues does predate Christianity by a long way. There's lots of references. Plato makes references to it in at least 3 of his dialogues. The ancient Greek oracles would sort of hand over their predictions to their clients in a sort of strange utterance. So this, of all the aspects of Stigmata and this sort of area, the speaking in tongues or glossolalia does actually predate this, or predate the birth of Christ.
Interesting.
But it does seem to be one of the gifts that is given alongside Stigmata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's down to translation. That he says, he says this is down to translation. If you can, sometimes he's had voices come through that have been blasphemous, so they're bad spirits. So it seems like it's, excuse me, an open channel, so any spirit could come through and talk in tongues. Yeah. And then they quickly shut it down if it's a bad, nasty spirit. They want the voice of the angels to come through. They want validation in that way. Levitation, again, we talk about levitation. He can levitate. There are times, he has bilocation as well. Alongside this, he calls them gifts.
Mm-hmm.
He's interacted with people in 2 different locations at the same time. He sees that as a gift. I find all those excess gifts that come along with Stigmata absolutely fascinating, because they are pure paranormal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking for paranormal, and stop off here and have a look at this. I mean, it does have a lot of the qualities of what a lot of people are out there searching for.
I mean, we did look into a little bit about exorcism, because obviously we were sort of like looking at this, talking in tongues and, you know, things like this. We sort of went off at an angle and looked at a little bit of exorcism. In every denomination, there is a form of exorcism.
Mm-hmm.
There is a belief system within every single denomination that a bad spirit or a spirit can come and take over a physical form and inhabit a physical form.
I think that's just covering their backside, isn't it?
What makes you say that?
Well, because it's only literally a theory and belief that there is a God. And a lot, well, I personally believe a lot of the demon stuff, and especially from the religious side of things, they just basically come up with that to get bums on seats. But they don't know whether or not that it's true, because to every good there is a bad. So it does stand to reason that there's bad spirits as well and bad demons. So just to cover their backside, they'll have a protocol in for it, and that's every religion.
Mm. Yeah, particularly with the phenomenon of talking in tongues. I mean, even though it's been documented throughout history, I mean, it did have a particularly big revival during the late 19th and early 20th century. There was a huge Pentecostal movement that sort of swept most of Europe and America particularly. So, you know, most people that do practice actually this are sort of more of these sort of charismatic type sort of churches, you know. I hope I don't insult anyone, but, you know, the more sort of happy clappy type churches, you know, the congregations that get themselves into euphoria whilst sort of worshipping and stuff like that, you know. So these sorts of denominations that practice that sort of worship, it tends to affect them more. I mean, you wouldn't turn up at your local C of E church, you know, and expect your vicar to start talking in tongues, you know, because it is actually looked upon quite, you know, not favourably in a lot of the traditional type churches.
No, it's not an everyday occurrence, is it? So, and it shouldn't be. This is a form of worship that shouldn't be, but it is a gift that Stigmata seem to have as well. Yeah. And they are like the ultimate in the embodiment of Christ, as it were. Do you know what I mean? When you look at it in that way, we're not talking about the passion evangelistic orthodox people that are out there that are doing it. You know, we've seen many times, we've seen that exorcisms and stuff like that are carried out are done behind closed doors. It's very private. We're not talking about the ones that you see. I think we can all agree that if it's recorded and put out there, then generally it's fake, right? And it's a mindset that's of hysteria that somebody has got themselves into. It's different because the people that it's affecting are people that are not embodying that sensationalism. They're not out for that. There's a difference in person who you're dealing with. If you went and saw this stigmatic Sudak that's alive, what the energy he would give off would be completely different to somebody who was babbling in tongues in a church hysteria scenario. You've got to talk about it in terms of completely different things. When you talk about possession, you've got to look at the individual case of why that person is doing that. You know, you look at the exorcism of Annalise Michel, is it?
Oh, right, yeah. Well, was it Emily Rose, or was that the film?
Yeah, that film was Emily Rose, but it was based on a real-life story of a girl that was basically, she had schizophrenia and epilepsy. But she spoke in tongues, which is why they went down the road of the exorcisms. Horrific story in its own right of that one. But when you look at that, they didn't just go, oh, well, she's, you know, having fits and stuff. There were signposts that made the priests think she was possessed, and talking in tongues was one of them. I think she was talking in Russian, which she never knew. I could be wrong on that fact. I know she was speaking in a different language to the one she knew.
Yeah, there's a lot of controversy about that case, sort of, because I think wasn't a couple of priests were actually prosecuted by the authorities afterwards for neglect. That is quite a controversial case, but even so, yeah.
But then who's to say these people that have stigmata, and Dan Brown's got it right with the Da Vinci Code, and it's the bloodline of Christ. Could be hereditary.
Now, there's a thought.
Now, there's a thought. Yeah. Who knows?
Well, there's a concept for you to get your teeth into next week.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my Lord, is all I'm saying on that one. Whatever way you want to look at it, when you look at religion, you can't discount paranormal phenomena that does occur within it. And even on a day-to-day basis, you have to consider the belief system that lies behind it, whether or not it's a physical manifestation of a belief system, or whether it is a divine gift from God. If you're looking at it that way, that's paranormal. God is then an entity, isn't he? He's an entity that can affect our lives. And if you look at, as Paul said earlier in the show, if you're looking at something with that power of good, the force of good of God, you've got to accept that there's a dark side, that there's a power of bad as well. And you have to balance that. Everything has a balance. And the belief system plays into this so much. And it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating when you look at various aspects. I mean, as I say, we've been talking about this show for about 4 or 5 nights and going down different rabbit holes that are connected to this. And it is full of paranormal phenomena, full of belief system, full of unbelievable miracles almost. We was looking at some of the miracles that from drinking water at Lourdes, or Lourdes, miracles that have happened on a healing front. Is it power of suggestion? Is it the placebo effect? Is it the power of belief? Who knows, right? Who knows? But it makes a fascinating insight into possible, I don't know what's the word, possible things that could be around that are unseen. And that is what makes it all so fascinating to me. I just find the whole concept, I could go on in this vein of looking at this for quite a while, but I think we're going to change tracks next week for a different show. We're going to change tracks on you. We think we've bashed you enough with the religious things for the time being. We may well revisit on a different topic to do with that. Anyway, we've got blogs out. If you want to go and read our blogs, you need to go to www.paranormalconcept.com and you can read all of our blogs that have gone up. We've got quite a few coming up and there's loads already on there. And a link to all of our shows, it's over there on there as well. On that note, guys, anything to add? Any last thoughts on this?
No, not at all.
Fascinating.
We've covered quite a lot.
Fascinating topic. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I've often come across Stigmata, you do when you sort of go through your paranormal encyclopedias and stuff at home, and it's always something, I never really sort of knew what to make of it, and certainly doing this show and the week we've had of the build-up to it, sort of like doing the research, I certainly view it now, and it's certainly something more than what I thought it was. And whatever it was I thought it was, I don't really know. But there's certainly a lot of food for thought in this.
And that's it, and definitely raises more questions still, doesn't it?
And that's what the paranormal does. It generally raises more questions than answers, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
On that note, we'd all like to bid you a very farewell. Say goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Goodbye, guys.
Barclays app features help me manage my money and see where it's going. Now I've got that all-seeing feeling. I can see all my upcoming scheduled payments so I can plan ahead. See exactly when and where I spend my money so I know what types of things I'm spending it on. And compare my monthly balances so I can see my every move. Get the all-seeing feeling for yourself with money management features in the Barclays app. Make money work for you. Barclays. You need to be 16 or over to use the Barclays app. T's and C's apply.